about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to our latest live stream, and the first in this sort of pre-exam period. It's great that lots of you are joining us live this evening. If you are, please do join in with the activities that we're going to be looking at in a moment in the live chat window. Lots to do this evening, haven't we, Ciara?
Yeah, going through a lot of paper one activities and just doing some general revision.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of the first half of the UK politics bit on component one, I guess. And we'll do the rest of it in the lead up to the exams, and obviously by the next week or the week after, it's all going to seem quite imminent, isn't it? Because we are getting there. Shall we? I've just realised one thing I didn't do today, so here's hoping this is going to work out all right. That was me thinking I was all prepped. Does that look anything like... Oh, it's not far off. Okay. We have got the presentation. So I'm going to hand straight over to Ciara for our first activity, which is a connection wall.
Right, yeah. So essentially, can you find the kind of commonality between these 12 key phrases? So you'll basically work out there's going to be three groups of four, sorry. So in the chat, you can put down the grid reference about which ones might be connected with each other, so which ones might belong together, and then see if you can work out what the connection is between them. So it's all from paper one as well.
Yeah. There are one or two that could potentially go together in other ways, but we've got something on our that we're expecting.
Yeah, it's like the line of kind of what's the best fit kind of for them. What do they have in common? Which ones can be connected?
So we're looking out for your comments in the chat window. Do you know what order they come in, Kira?
Yeah.
Oh, that's always good. Oh, Alfie's
Oh,
come in with a suggestion.
that's a good one. So he's saying NEU, CSJ, Just Stop Oil, and Howard League of Penal Reform are pressure groups. Excellent. That's actually one of the categories. Not the first one, but it is one of them. And Rochelle's brilliantly come in with the first one. SNP, Labour, Conservatives are political parties. Yep. There's one that's missing. Oh, it's on Liberal Democrats.
Oh, sorry,
Excellent.
so yeah, Liberal
Okay.
Democrats also.
So excellent from Rochelle, and Alfie's right for the last one. But what about the second one? What could that be? So Alfie's done a bit of the work there, mentioning the pressure groups. But there's a last connection that's missing there. What could the last one be? So think about the ones that haven't been said. Can you work out which ones they are and how they can be connected?
So what have we got left? Magna Carta.
Jacob's coming and Tabby at
Oh,
the exact same time. So Equality Act, HR, Human Rights Act,
yeah,
ECHR, and the Magna Carta. Brilliant. Yeah, they are
and
all
yeah, sorry.
constitutional forms. Yeah.
I
Um,
think Jacob has put legislation protecting human rights,
okay.
which
Yeah. Pretty
yeah,
much. Yeah.
that gets pretty close to it, isn't it? And then someone else put rights protecting legislation. That McAllister said not necessarily all legislation, is it? But they are all definitely relating to rights. And yeah, let's have a quick look. What do we put? Rights in
Yeah.
context. It's sort of covered in that part of this
Tech words,
topic.
but it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there we go.
One was
Um,
pressure.
yeah, I was just thinking on the pressure groups one. There's a nice mixture of very different types of pressure groups there, haven't you? Because you've got like the Howard League for Penal Reform, which is um, sometimes cited as an example of an insider group, quite minor sort of niche interest, I suppose.
Yeah,
Just Stop Oil.
because they
Sorry.
don't have the Harrow League of Penal Reform are interesting because they don't necessarily have a political leaning, but it's their expertise that means that they can be consulted on. So
Absolutely.
they're an insider sometimes, but not necessarily because of an association with a party.
No. And then you've got Just Stop Oil as a good outsider group. We've got National Education Union as a good example of an interest or sectional group. And Centre for Social Justice, which we generally think of as a think tank, but they do also put pressure on government, so we can talk about them in relation to um, pressure groups as well. And I guess they're a kind of insider group in a way, aren't they? Because they're very much associated with the Conservative Party. So yeah,
Are very, very closely linked to it. They even
yeah,
some of their members are in the were in the cabinet before, so very
yeah,
closely related to government. Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, still with Ciara. We've got a bit of a debate to go now
Yeah.
on
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to look. So obviously, it's really important that we can kind of group things together. So we're saying focus on questions and things like that. But the other thing that's quite important for your exam is about being able to kind of understand an argument and be able to present both sides before coming to an overall judgment. So let's say that the question is about, does the UK have a democratic deficit? So can you think of two ways that the UK does have a democratic deficit? So can you give me two arguments for why there is a kind of limits to British democracy, failures even in British democracy? What could we say?
if you got the oh, there's an answer coming through there from Louis. Lower participation. I was just going to say, if you got the Duty to You Politics Update magazine, the new one that came out in the last couple of weeks ago, there was a really good article in there about limits to our democracy. Definitely worth a read if you've got access to it. It is
I
free.
like this. Yeah, it's pretty. So Louis made a good point. It's like lower participation, yeah, and so
Yeah.
a participation crisis could constitute a democratic deficit. And I really like to see Alfie's point that youth turnout is pretty low as well. So about 47% of young voters turning out, and that's quite an important point. And Rochelle said, but also the fact that the franchise is still limited, some might argue. So the fact that 16 to 17-year-olds are unable to vote, or prisoners can't vote. So you could argue if not everybody's able to participate, then that could lead to a participation crisis. Good point. Oh, and a lovely point here as well, again, by Rochelle, the fact that tactical voting is a result of the electoral system. So first past the post means that people aren't voting for what they want; they tend to vote tactically because their vote doesn't necessarily matter in some parts of the country.
And
Really good point.
that links nicely with Luke's point about the lack of
Mhm.
representation for smaller parties. That very much links together. Why is there lack of representation for smaller parties? Well, again, because of first past the post and people feeling there's not much point in voting for those parties because they're unlikely to win. I assume
Really
that
good.
links to the point about representation as well from here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, representation can be a problem too. And actually, they're not the ones that I've put down. Is there anything else? So Alfie switched to healthy. Is there
Yeah,
anything else that
we'll
we
do
can
that one in a
say
sec.
for why it could be a democratic deficit?
Lots of good points there, weren't there?
Really good points. It shows that you can go any direction on this anyway. Um,
Are all the institutions in our that kind of govern us democratic? Are there some parts of the constitution or parts of government that we don't vote for? That's one angle we could go down as well.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
we've also got
Yeah,
there about protection of rights. Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good point from Jakob, right? That the fact that rights aren't always protected as well, the uncodified constitution. Rochelle, brilliant, House of Lords. Yeah, like we have a whole unelected chamber. They don't have that much influence. Oh, wait, sorry. Somebody in the cabinet is from the House of Lords. That's one of the great offices of state. So maybe that is a problem.
Yeah.
Membership is low for parties, and if parties are important, good point, Alfie, then surely if party membership is low, does it mean that a small minority of people get to choose who our MPs are?
And that
Misinformation.
links.
Yeah,
I was
sorry,
just
go on.
sorry. I was just going to say that point about the low party membership links very nicely with Luke's point about prime ministers not having a direct mandate from the electorate. And
Mm,
I mean, really, no prime minister has a direct mandate from the electorate, but certainly the last couple of ones we've had were, just elected by Conservative Party members, and as Alfie says, party membership's very low, so very few people involved in that decision, really. So,
brilliant. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the Supreme Court is weak as well, which is an important part of democracy. Misinformation and party manifestos. We've seen a lot of that going around at the moment. Weak mandates as well. Oh yes, Jakob, that's the point that I put down as well. So wealthy pressure groups tend to dominate, right? So this could be a big problem too. Like the role of insider groups that can lead to tyranny of the minority. So is it right that these think tanks have such a direct influence over government policy? So, for example, the CSJ, Centre for Social Justice, effectively writing policy for the Department of Work and Pensions. Is that correct? Then also on the other side of it, and we've seen a lot of this in the last few years. So corruption and sleaze turning people away from politics. So is that because it's good to say that there's a participation crisis, but I think it's also important to try to elaborate that and say why there's a participation crisis. Have people just feel everything's bad? It's so corrupt. I'm not going to vote anymore and turn away from it. And we've seen that with the Dyson scandal, for example, the Number 10 scandal, Partygate, and things like that.
yeah.
So yes, you already started mentioning actually about anything about a healthy democracy. Is there anything else you want to add to that? So how can what arguments can we have that actually deficit is a little bit strong? Is there something else we can say that it's not, in fact, a democratic deficit? There's just other
So
issues.
yeah,
Or
so
good.
Alfie mentioned that turnout has improved since 2001, where it was only 59%, and that's true. It isn't as bad as it was, although we could still say it's quite low.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got some more coming through. Amber and Jakob.
So new forms of democracy and participation online. Yeah, true. So things like petitions have kind of engaged more people in politics, and that includes people who can't vote. So that's quite good, isn't it? So it's more inclusive. Healthy democracy, so free and fair elections. First past the post is easy to understand and produces quick results. That's
Yeah.
true. So does that mean that more people participate? It's interesting actually. I've seen two people here have just said use of referendums or frequent referendums. elections. And somebody put that as a negative earlier. And I mean, that's up to however you want to argue that. They could go
Yeah.
either way. Do we have a representative democracy and therefore referendums undermine that? It's however you want to argue it,
Yeah.
really.
And that's always handy for a an essay question, isn't it? If you could like make a case for the use of referendums being good or bad for democracy, then you've got a nice little argument and counter argument there, haven't you, which can be useful.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Majority governments are usually formed, which allows for legislation to be effectively passed. Very good point, Luke. Like, what's the point of a government that cannot govern? Does it kind of make us a more efficient democracy? And Mahir said, which is a really good point, the House of Lords Reform Act, there's only 92 hereditary peers now. And that's a really good point because as much as there's flaws in our democracy, the fact that it is flexible and adaptive means that it can be repaired and adjusted to modern times. That's a really nice point.
We've got a point there about party memberships increasing, and particularly Labour Party membership increased a lot, but from sort of around 2015 and for the next couple of years, it has decreased a bit in the last year or two, but it's still much higher than it was in the sort of 90s and noughties. So, well, certainly the 2000s. So that is true. Party membership is higher than it was during perhaps the period where people wrote about there being a participation crisis a lot in the 2000s. That was sort of where people were particularly concerned about
Mm,
participation crisis. Conservative Party membership is still very low,
yeah.
but Labour Party membership is higher than it once was, although not quite as high as it was 2015 to 2018 ish.
And that's why somebody mentioned obviously 2001 being the
Mm,
that was the plateau, right? And it's gone up since, and that's definitely true. So
mm,
then it sometimes can be helpful to think, well, why was the 2001 election so low? And
mm,
some people have described it as apathy rather than apathy. So it's because they were happy with the way that Tony Blair was governing, but Conservatives would never, that was argued then, would never
mm.
switch over to Labour. So rather than voting for the Conservatives, they just decided not to vote at all because
Yeah.
they were happy with Labour.
We've got freedom of the media there and recall petitions for MPs. These are really good points.
Good point.
And all ones that you could counter as well, which are always handy. You could say, well, how effective are the recall petitions for MPs? How many have been used, etc. But yeah, it's definitely a good point. I was just thinking on the turnout one as well. So turnout's been increasing, as somebody said earlier. Each election from 2001 got a slightly higher turnout until 2019, which was a little lower than 2017. So that's quite interesting as well.
Mm,
Why we had a mini dip then, but it's still higher than it previously was, even though it was down a little on 2019
mm.
on 2017. Yeah. Shall we see what we got?
Yeah, sure. So two ways that it's healthy. So isn't exactly the same as somebody mentioned. Voter turnout has begun to increase, and then greater transparency
Mm,
through lobbying reforms. It kind of feeds into some of the points that you were saying. I was just trying to link it a little bit.
mm,
But effectively, you can argue that yes, we have had a deficit, but whenever there's a deficit, that has been resolved through reforms. Although, considering Cameron was the one who did the lobbying reforms and said lobbying will be our next greatest scandal, and he got caught up in the scandal himself,
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
it was much to be desired. So
yeah.
it comes to whichever one. So you just kind of think if you pair your arguments and then you start to say why one's better than the other, that will help as a part of revision, getting ready for the exam.
Yeah. So it's always useful to think of these things in the context of a debate and the different arguments on them, because that is, for the most part, what you're going to be doing, almost exclusive what you're going to be doing through your exams. So it's great having all the knowledge and all the knowing what happened, and having lots of examples. But it's always great to think about how does that contribute to a debate. So yeah,
Mm.
well done. Okay, we've got a little categorise activity now. Got 8 policies on the screen. And what you've got to do in 60 seconds is try and allocate them to either being a Conservative Party policy, a Labour Party policy, or one that actually both parties currently support. It's always a little tricky at this time in an election cycle to talk about party policies, because obviously it's quite a long time since the last time the parties publish their manifestos for an election, and there's been a lot of changes in both parties since the 2019 election. So with Conservative Party policy, we're kind of talking about things that they have announced that they want to do as a government, but in some cases it's things that they've said that they would do in the future, and they're not necessarily saying that they're going to do it before the next election, because that's likely to be reasonably soon. And with the Labour policies, we're looking at things which they've said they have announced that they are still intending to do. Obviously, there are some things in the 2019 manifesto that they cease to talk about. Okay, let's have a look at this one. We'll set the timer going and see if you can allocate them. So just put the party and the number, as some of you have already started doing, obviously. Well done. Just watch out for the both ones. Okay, well done. Some good responses coming through. And as I mentioned at one point, is spotting the ones that are both can sometimes be perhaps a little bit tricky. I think both Alfie and Tabby have both suggested that reducing NHS wait times could be a both. We'll have a look at that in a sec. I'm not sure any party has ever gone to an election not promising to reduce NHS wait times or pledging to do so. It's fairly standard.
Popular policy.
Yeah. Alfie's put nationalised railways, free breakfast clubs in every primary school, and charge VAT on private schools as being Labour policies. Rochelle's put increased defence spending, cap corporation tax at current rate, compulsory maths and English to 18, and investigate abolishing national insurance for Conservatives. There might be a couple of those that are also Labour policies as well. So shall we have a look? They definitely are all ones that Conservatives said they'd do, but a couple of them might be ones that Labour have suggested that they would also do. So let's have a look. So Conservative, the only ones that were exclusively Conservative, compulsory maths and English to 18, and investigate abolishing national insurance. They have also said they would cap corporation tax at the current rate, but so Labour has suggested they would do the same. They've both said they want to reduce NHS waiting times, and they've both said they'd like to increase defence spending, although the Conservatives have announced a specific sum, a specific percentage, whereas Labour has said that was more of an aspiration rather than that they would definitely match that.
We're already one of the highest spenders on our military in the world. It's crazy considering so small.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it comes to like pledges as being part of NATO, doesn't it? There are certain spending pledges that you have. Just making a little global link there. That goes with your NATO membership. The free breakfast clubs in every primary school one is interesting, I think, because in the 2017 election, that was a Theresa May policy. I don't know if people remember that. Labour policy was to have free meals, free lunches, free dinners for every primary school child. And the Conservative kind of counter to that was that they'd have free breakfast. Although the amount of money they pledged to cover it, I think someone did a kind of worked out how much breakfast you could, and possibly half a slice of toast or something might have been possible. But it's interesting that's come through. Yeah, the ones that are both are quite interesting, I think. Yeah. But well done. So it's useful to keep an eye on policies. Obviously, there'll be announcements all the time at the moment. So, there will be new policy announcements coming all the time, and it's worth keeping an eye on them. Do they suggest any sort of shift in philosophy? I think we could probably see something of a shift in philosophy in Labour from the last general election to what they're proposing in this one, although you've still got like nationalised railways there, which was in and charge VAT on private schools, which were in the 2019 manifesto and are still there today. But one or two other things have gone. There were some other nationalisations promised in 2019 that are no longer being proposed. Alfie's put an interesting point there about whether Prince George needs a taxpayer-funded breakfast. I'm assuming that the breakfast clubs probably wouldn't include fee-paying schools, I suppose, but it's for everyone in state education. And the discussion and debate over means tested versus universal benefits is an interesting one, but probably not for today. And Rochelle makes a he already gets a taxpayer funded breakfast when he's at home. This is true. Yeah, okay. you can have that discussion and debate in the chat window, I think, about the
but not in your exam. I'm not going to get you any extra.
No.
Stick to the question, but very, very valid point. So this one is the lineup. So you can see you've got 4 pressure groups here. You've got Fabian Society, Extinction Rebellion, Institute of Economic Affairs, and the National Union of Farmers. And we're going to see 4 statements, and I want you to think which statement is being applied. So which pressure group is the statement referring to? So try and think. It's kind of like a process of elimination, really, as we go through. Which ones can you eliminate from the lineup?
Yes. So we're just describing one of them, aren't we? In each.
Yeah.
So the statement. Each statement, all the statements are about one of them. So yeah, okay.
Cool. So it exerts pressure on the government. That was pretty useless, wasn't it? I
don't think that's helping us at all.
It's terrible. Deliberately mean, yeah. So no one's going to get there. Shapes policy through research. Oh, that's more. Any guesses from that? Could it even to some degree be all of them, but some doing it more specifically, right?
Some will do more research than others, mightn't they?
Yeah, exactly. So rather than just processing and things like that, it's about shaping policy through research. Okay, got a good guess there from Rochelle, Tabby, and Tabby as well. So should we give away number 3? See if they're going to confirm their choices. A close relationship with the current government, and in fact, the last few governments since. I nearly said too much there. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of people come in because I was thinking with the research could easily be the Fabian Society there, as a left-wing think tank does lots of research, but not a close relationship with the government. So these guesses looking pretty good to me.
Took credit for the mini budget and argued it was poorly executed by Liz Truss. Anyone changing their mind or arguing?
I don't think so.
In Zim now, yeah. It's the Institute of Economic Affairs, and they've had a close relationship with the government since Margaret Thatcher, actually. So quite a revolving door between politicians and members of the think tank, as well as obviously meeting with politicians regularly and things like that as well. So really great example, because I really love it when you have a think tank example or a pressure group example, when you can say, yes, this is them saying that they shaped this policy. So it's good to have that because it's not hypothetical, it's concrete. So IEA actually took credit for the mini budget. Centre for Social Justice is also good because they came up with universal credit as well. So those are solid ones.
Yeah, always handy for effectiveness type questions. Are they effective?
Exactly, yeah.
Whether the ultimate policy is effective or not is another matter.
That doesn't matter. Yeah.
We're going to look at some data now. So you're going to have a little bit of time and some soothing music to have a look at some data. And it's about party funding. So we're looking at political parties. It's donations to political parties during the 2019 general election campaign, which is obviously our most recent general election, and that is going to be the case for the exam now. We were speculating earlier in the term whether there was a possibility of a general election before the exam, but there won't be. So you can see how much money was donated to each of the parties during the election campaign in 2019, both the total and how much they got from different sections, where the money came from. So have a look at that. I want you to say, can you draw any major conclusions? Can you pick up what are the main things you could pick up from that, other than the fact that the Conservative Party just got donated an awful lot more money than anybody else? But can we pick anything else up from that data? Okay. This is, of course, just during the campaign, so there were donations to all the parties between elections as well, but they get declared in a different way. Okay, some good suggestions coming through already. Tabby has made what I think probably the key point to take away: Conservatives get most of their funding from individuals, while Labour gets most of their funding from the trade unions, and that was perhaps more the case in 2019 than any other time. But that would be a general pattern too. That's an interesting one. There's some correlation between this from Alfie. Some correlation between donations and seats. However, there are outliers like Reform UK received over £4 million but didn't get any seats, and the SNP got a small amount and many seats. That is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Reform UK, was it Brexit? Yeah, Brexit Party. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you get a good vote share if you've got lots of money, right? Because then you can move into more seats and things like that. Because it's okay if you don't meet the threshold and you can pay the fee.
Yes, you can risk having to lose your deposit, so you can
Yeah.
send more candidates. Absolutely. I suppose the reason why some of the parties, that even ones who've got MPs like Sinn Féin and SNP, seem to have less money coming in, is because they're standing in a relatively smaller number of areas. They don't need to raise as much money as parties that are trying to stand in every seat in the country. As I mentioned, these are the donations that came in during the actual election campaign. Some of these parties will have got lots of funding from other places at other times. Interestingly, if we're thinking about changes since 2019, I think Labour is getting more individual donations now than they were in 2019, and that's partly as a result of changing leadership and policies, perhaps. They are at risk, of course, of getting less trade union funding, although at the moment there haven't been many high-profile disaffiliations. Rochelle's put trade union donations were high when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, and this may have changed the start of shift to centrist new Labour policies. Yeah, there is that possibility. The flip side of that is they get more individual donations from people who perhaps particularly weren't keen on some of the tax policies in 2019. Brexit Party donations may have come from people wanting to speed up the Brexit deal process. Absolutely. Obviously, the Brexit Party, had a bit of an electoral pact with the Conservative Party during the 2019 election as well. So, they have played an interesting part in that election.
It's a lot of.
Yeah. So, I mean, I picked up on one, I think, which was I'm trying to remember who. I think it was Alfie, Tabby, who came up with it. But you've come up with loads of other ones. So there were, Labour mostly funded by trade unions, Conservative overwhelmingly by individual donors. Big company support for Conservatives as well. So, but it is interesting seeing some of what's happening elsewhere in those in those areas, and particularly the sort of big individual donations for some of the parties, including the Liberal Democrats and the Brexit Party, as people mentioned. Parties getting big individual donations that didn't necessarily translate into a large number of votes, or certainly not into a large number of seats. Yeah. Okay. Strong correlation between total value of donations and amount of votes. Yeah, the more money you got, the more seats you got for the most part, although we did see some exceptions. Okay. Got an activity now from Ciara called Confusing Pairs.
Yeah, so obviously, when it comes to things like revision, it's good to think about examples and maybe try and match up examples to arguments or the other way around, starting with an argument and finding examples for it. So we've tried to do that, but we've gotten confused. And it's about thinking, have we mixed them up or not? Does this fit in as it should do? So, for example, we've put here the kind of MPs voting with their party. That's the statement. And we've matched that to Dawn Butler hosting a constituency meeting asking how she should vote on triggering Article 50. Then we've got MPs voting as delegates. We're looking for an example of that. Delegates when they just basically do as people want them to, their constituency wants them to, and that's Boris Johnson standing at the division telling MPs how to vote on the Brexit deal. Now, are these pairs correct or not? Do they match properly?
Do we need to
Does the
switch them, or
example
are
match?
they okay?
No, from Alfie. Yeah,
Well done.
yeah,
Okay, they are the wrong way around, aren't they? That one about
yeah.
MPs voting as delegates is an interesting one, isn't it? Because of course the other area that we might talk about, and apologies if I'm jumping on something that's going to come up on later in the activity, but is of course MPs voting as trustees, that kind of Burkean type idea, and this idea of asking, yeah, having a meeting and asking your constituents how you should vote on an issue goes totally against that kind of trustee type thing where, which suggests that Dawn Butler should use her judgment to decide what is the best
Yeah, and it
approach.
was a really interesting example because she's from the representative for Brent Central. So Brent is the most diverse, well, it was at that time the most diverse borough in the whole of the country. So overwhelmingly, people voted to remain. But obviously, for Corbyn, he wanted to respect the referendum result and he whipped the MPs and said, you must vote to trigger it because that's the will of the people. That's what the people wanted. We're going to act as delegates to the country rather than the constituency. So if she knew that by vote having this meeting, she could get more legitimacy to break the whip, but she
Yeah,
knew the consequence would be that she would lose her position on the shadow cabinet, and Corbyn did have to fire her from the shadow cabinet as well. She had to resign
yeah,
as a result of it. So it's an interesting one
yeah.
on the
Despite them
referendum.
being, reasonable sort of allies, yeah, the kind of allies and similar sort of political area, and it's an interesting one for a couple of reasons. Because really, she was acting as a trustee because her judgment was we should remain. She was a Remainer. She voted Remain.
Also
So,
true.
um,
Yeah.
and so really, she was kind of using the kind of delegate approach, as you say, to kind of justify her decision or to
It's a
validate her
clever
decision.
political move, yeah.
Yeah,
It was a good move, and I think it did a lot for her in terms of the respect for the constituency.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, it's hard to argue against that as a party leader, isn't
yeah,
it? Uh,
yeah.
good political
Absolutely.
move.
And then the other one, Boris Johnson shouting at people to, no, you got to vote that way.
Mm. Brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
Uh,
Like apparently, because obviously the way that when it's not certain, the way that the vote's gone is they literally just go into different rooms outside in the Commons. They go to one room if
yeah,
they want to vote for the bill, or one room if they want to vote against it. So they literally divide the House in that sense. And Boris Johnson stood at the division line, and he basically, in one sense, threatened MPs like, "I'm protecting you," right? Which obviously the whip do, but he did it.
yeah,
And the other thing he sometimes did as well, depending on who it was quite literally beg them, like, please, 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 go on, be a good friend. Da, da, da.
yeah,
So forcing that party vote. So we've
yeah,
got the wars, but this is a nice concrete example
yeah,
about how he
yeah,
got the Brexit deal through as well. So
yeah.
something to
And
steal.
interesting that he was doing it rather than the whips on or as well as the whips on that occasion. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so what about this case then? So another one about MPs voting with their party. Does the Assisted Dying Bill of 2015 represent that? And then the other one is MPs as trustees, which Duncan mentioned earlier. The Rwanda Bill of 2024, right? So are these correct? Could they be?
Jakob's saying these might be right.
Oh yeah, and oh yeah, actually, because
It's an
depends when
interesting.
you're About the
Obviously,
Rwanda.
yeah, there were some rebels on Rwanda, weren't there?
Mm.
But most didn't. Yeah, most voted along party lines of the MPs, didn't they? There was more dissent in the Lords, I'd say, than in the Commons. But there were some
There were
examples.
dissenters though, yeah. And
Mm,
earlier on in the year, there were more
mm,
dissenters, right? But Sunak really did mobilize the whips and whip his party into voting how he wanted them to. So it actually depends on when you're looking at it, I guess. But when we're looking at the thing that happened 2 weeks ago, I think it's a good one to show MPs voting with the party because we know that many of them disagreed with it, as seen by their dissent earlier in the year and last year as well. So it is a good
mm.
point. Um, yeah.
What do you want to just explain the assisted dying bill one? Because that's quite a good example for MPs voting on their judgment or their beliefs rather than
Yeah,
by
I think
party.
it's a great example, and I think it's the best one for it still, even though it's 2015. I haven't seen a better case of this. So, effectively, assisted dying is a quite a popular idea in the UK now. Apparently, like 90% of people are in support of assisted dying, and I mean, you can understand the arguments for it. There's a strong pressure group that's pushing for it, and it was put forward as a backbencher bill in 2015. And so obviously Cameron was prime minister then, and he said, "Well, this is a moral issue. I can't whip people to vote either way. It should be down to the conscience of the MPs." So he gave permission in that sense for MPs to vote as trustees. And MPs actually, after much debate, and it was a very emotional debate, the majority of the MPs in the Commons voted to reject it. And it was interesting because if it was tyranny of the majority, they would have pushed it through. But when they were voting on this, they weren't thinking of the majority of people, right? People who might have lived a long and healthy life and be able to make that decision for themselves. They were thinking about the minorities and they were thinking, well, what about people who have disabilities? Could this lead to pressuring people because they're inconvenient and things like that? So that was more so the reason why they went for it. But it is in the Commons again. They're talking about it again. So it'd be interesting to see if the next vote, how it responds as well.
Yeah, an interesting one on that is um, in recent years, both in about Syria, but there was a more recent one as well. So the Syria wasn't that recent. That was 2015ish as well. 2016. There was a more recent example as well. John McDonnell in the Labour Party has been arguing that they ought to have free votes on military action votes, which they don't. They always have that as a whipped vote. But on the same making the same argument that it's a sort of conscience vote and that some people are pacifists as a point of conscience and should be able to vote with their conscience on that sort of an issue. So that's quite an interesting one where it has been whipped, but people have argued that it hasn't. And I think both approaches have been taken to votes on abortion, with free
Mm.
votes and whip votes in the past. So that's quite an interesting one as well. Yeah. Okay. Next. Oh, that's our last one. I'll come back to the come back to the studio. Thanks very much for all your responses today. Some really good answers. Lots of people are asking, are we doing more of these? We are. Same time, same place next week. I say same place. I mean, yes, YouTube is the same place. Well, we'll look at kind of the second half of the UK politics bit of component one. So we'll be looking at electoral systems and voting behaviour in elections and that kind of thing. And we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. So the week after that, I think, is getting very close to the exam. So we're going to look at a bit on the core political ideas, but also just like a kind of pre-exam warm-up kind of thing. You can ask us anything. And then we're going to do as much as we can for all the other papers as well. Yakov's asked if we're doing some of these for Geography A Level. I believe so. If you go onto the YouTube site or tutor2u.net/live, you can see scheduled live streams on there. Lots of people saying thank you. We say thank you as well. Thank you very much. We'll see you very soon. If you get If you can do, just click the thumbs up button. It always helps for other people to find these videos, and do subscribe so you find out about the next one. All right, thanks guys. Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye bye.